Well, welcome everyone. We are so glad to see familiar faces and new faces here today to think about this extremely important topic of cyber charter schools in the Commonwealth.
Okay,
I'm Carolyn Adams, as ML said, and I'm a long-term volunteer and supporter of Children First, which some of you will recognize as the 40-year-old organization that used to call itself Public Citizens for Children and Youth. We're dedicated to advocating for government policies that provide the greatest benefit to the children, not just of our city and not just of our region, but of the Commonwealth at large. And one of our leading professionals in our organization is ML Wernecke, from whom you will hear today. She directs our Charter School Performance Center, and she has just completed an analysis of the state of cyber charter schools across the Commonwealth. So today we're going to hear about her findings, and we're delighted to present two panels of engaged and informed experts who are going to comment about the issue from their own perspectives. We're going to introduce those panelists when it's their turn to talk. But I do want to take the opportunity right now at the top just to thank them for joining us today and giving their time to this really important topic and this important report. I also want to express our gratitude as an organization to the Ivywood Foundation for supporting not just the report that you will hear about today, but offering support also to the Charter Performance Center, which operates, of course, all the time. Now, these days, public attention has been focused on the epidemic and on its impacts on education. And the massive expansion of charter schools during the course of this epidemic is something that has caught our attention and about which we want to talk today. Last year alone, the enrollment in our Commonwealth's charter schools, our cyber charter schools, surged by 59%. I will say that again, 59%. I've been in the education sector for many years of my life, and that's an astonishing number for any level of education. That growth raises very important questions for taxpayers, for school districts, for student learning. And so our Pennsylvania Charter Performance Center set out to look at how other states are funding their charter schools, how other states are providing oversight to their charter schools. And the goal of this report is to advance debate about these critical issues. Now, I should say at the outset that I have today the unfortunate responsibility to try to keep the agenda moving so that we can hold ourselves to the 1 hour that we promised all of our attendees today. I'm sorry that occasionally I might have to intervene. I hope you'll forgive me for those intrusions. So first, I'm going to ask ML if she will summarize the findings of her report and present the resulting recommendations, and then we're going to hear from two panels. The first panel is going to be a panel of charter school experts. The second panel is going to be a panel of distinguished legislators who are leading policymakers on this subject for the Commonwealth. And then we're going to conclude with questions and answers from the audience. So can I just say to you right away, as we're going along in today's presentation, please enter your questions in the Q&A box at any time during the event, and we'll get to as many of those questions as possible at the end. Now let me turn this over to ML Wernecke for her report on the findings of this important study. ML?
Thank you, Carolyn. Hi, I'm ML Wernecke. I'm the director of the PA Charter Performance Center, and we use research and data in order to try to promote sound charter school policy in Pennsylvania. I want to thank everybody for coming today, and the research and data that we've been using for the last few months is informing this new report that we're releasing, the PA Disconnect in Cyber Charter Oversight and Funding. So it's just occurred to me that this is a good time to share my screen. screen having been shared, let's move ahead and start with a look at the national landscape. Did that advance? There we go. As you can see from the map, there are 28 states in the nation that allow cyber charter schools. Of those states, 8 of them are new, relatively new states, new since 2014. And I don't want to do a lot of regional analysis because, as you see, it's coast to coast and north to south, but I do want to point out that there are 4 states, all neighboring states for Pennsylvania, that have made a policy decision not to allow cyber charter schools, and those states being New York, New Jersey, Maryland, and Delaware. So the question, here's the landscape, but the question is, where does Pennsylvania stand? And there we go. And as you can see, we are the cyber charter capital of the nation, measured in terms of student enrollment, followed by Ohio, Arizona, and Michigan. And interestingly enough, if some of our large charter schools, namely the Commonwealth Charter Academy, or CCA as it is now called, if it was a state, it would come in right below Michigan. Now, the graph shows the enrollment in the last 2 years based on data that I collected from the state education agencies. And you can see across the board, there has been a surge of enrollment, and Pennsylvania is indeed at the top. So how does Pennsylvania set charter school tuition? Well, there's I think a fairly comprehensive discussion in the report, but let me just hit a couple of the high points. Under Pennsylvania's charter school law, cyber charters receive the exact same tuition as brick and mortar charter schools per pupil. And this is interesting, particularly because there are significant differences between the 2 types of schools, yet the tuition has just been carried over from one type to the other. In terms of the level that the tuition is set, Pennsylvania is fairly unique in the fact that tuition payments are based on school district expenditures, not how much it actually costs to educate a student or to pay for a class, an equivalent of a classroom of students. And when I say this is somewhat unusual, it's both because it's fairly rare, as you're going to see in a moment, but also because study after study has shown that the costs of education are 25 to 30% lower in a virtual environment versus an in-person environment. And finally, I want to note that special education tuition, the tuition rates for cyber charters is higher and rising. Now, this report focuses on tuition calculations for non-special education students. Who knows, maybe there'll be another report down the road, but there is a great variance across different districts, and it is rising over time. For people who want to, in effect, read ahead, I'd encourage you to look at the excellent work that's been done by Education Voters PA and Research for Action on special ed subject. Let's take a quick look at performance. And as these 2 charts show, all 14 cyber charters score below the state average in both English and math. And this is on the most recent assessment tests for which we have data. This is not just a Pennsylvania phenomenon. The National Education Policy Center looked at 320 schools across the country where they have ratings, verifiable ratings, and less than half were rated as acceptable. So now let's take a quick look at how much taxpayers are paying for the cyber charters in Pennsylvania. The short answer is the tuition payments collectively across the Commonwealth are approaching $1 billion and have doubled over the last 5 years. If we're going to try to look ahead and project, I would suggest looking at the excellent work of the Temple University Public Policy Lab which projects that charter fees will increase by 1.7 billion by 2025. So that's, in your mind, you can extend that bar and see how much else has to grow in a very short period of time. Based on the fact that in this last year, brick and mortar charter enrollment was very flat at virtually all. 99.7% of the enrollment growth is attributable to charters. It's clear that charters are going to, or cybers rather, are going to be a major cost driver. How do other states set cyber tuition rates? Basically, at the vast majority of states set them at the school, at the state level, either by setting a rate or by creating a statewide formula. Very few states, the 4 shown here in yellow, set them at a school district level. In addition to that methodology, let's take a look at how the tuition rates compare vis-a-vis brick and mortar charters. Now, it's true that many states set the rates at the same level, including Pennsylvania, but 11 states set the cyber charter tuition rates below the comparable rates for brick and mortar charter schools. And you can see a short summary of the disparities there and read more about it in the report. Why are they doing this? Well, for the reason that I alluded to before. The preponderance of research shows that costs in a virtual environment are 25 to 30% below an in-person environment. Oops, I don't know if there we go, good. Finally, let's compare Ohio and Pennsylvania and take a little bit more of a deep look. These two states they were both large charter states. They both started about 20 years ago, but they use very different systems. And starting with Ohio, the funding comes directly from the state, not the school district. They use a formula that sets a statewide tuition rate that is about $6,000 per student with a very small student facilities fee as well. In addition, the compensation is in part based on students participating in documented learning opportunities that could be completing assignments or modules or meetings with teachers. Pennsylvania, as we've already talked about, is very different. The funding comes from the school district where the student resides. Tuition varies significantly, about $8,900 to about $24,000 based on district expenditures, not the cost that the charter schools incur. And the payments are based on enrollment or seat time, regardless of what happens in the classroom and how much the student learns. Let's take a look at some recommendations that have come out of this report. The first is around audits. Now, you may or may not be aware that there have been some large scandals in major states, Ohio, Indiana, and California, that are related to how over-reporting enrollment and therefore collecting too much money. These 3 states alone total $368 million in overpayments. Now, in Pennsylvania, we don't exactly know what the situation is, frankly, because very few cyber charters are regularly reviewed by the Auditor General. 6 of 14 schools have never been reviewed, and the large CCA school with 270 million in revenues was last reviewed in 2012, meaning a decade ago. So we're recommending that cyber charter schools should be subject to regular reviews by the Auditor General. Second, state virtual schools. Now, that's a little different than our cyber charters are statewide, but a statewide virtual school is run by a state agency or contracted out by the state agency in order to do 2 things: offer online courses, but also provide the scaffolding, the infrastructure for technology, for curriculum, and the other services that are needed to support online education. Florida is really, I would say, the exemplar in this category, and both being the oldest, the largest, and I would say the best. The other thing I would note about Pennsylvania, though, is that we do have a network of 29 intermediate units that do many of the same services. They offer 25,000 students took online courses, and they offer some of the same technical and administrative support services that can be as a common good. Why do I think this is a good idea? Because it can both strengthen and streamline online education. Next step. Next up. Stop paying twice. Now, one of the consequences of the pandemic is that school districts across the Commonwealth invested in online capacity to provide virtual classes. In fact, over 90% of the school districts clearly have this. Given this new world, it didn't exist in 2002 when the charter school law was first passed for allowing for cyber charters. The world has changed, and I'm asking the question of why should taxpayers pay twice? I'm not the only person asking this question. There's been several pieces of legislation that have been introduced. And while a lot of legislation has been introduced in Pennsylvania, in fact, one report called us a front runner in attempting to calibrate funding, that same report also notes not a lot has passed. And one way that I think we can break the logjam would be to create a bipartisan cyber charter school funding advisory committee. Think basic education funding commission, but focusing on cyber charter school funding. I think this model has been proven successful, where we would have a bipartisan makeup that would study, craft and revise proposals, and build consensus so that change can actually occur in Pennsylvania. Another important area is to align costs. And I think probably the best known piece of legislation right now is House Bill 27, which is House Bill 272, which is also Senate Bill 27, that would create a uniform tuition rate. There's been a lot of discussion on this, particularly on the House side, and it's worth noting that there is genuine bipartisan support with over 75 sponsors, including 14 Republicans at this time. In addition to establishing a statewide tuition rate, another thing that I learned from the other states was that 5 of them have a pay-per-performance system: Florida, Minnesota, Utah, Texas, and New Hampshire, that ties the payments not just to does somebody log on, but does somebody complete work, and in some cases, does somebody master or demonstrate competency of the material? One thing we don't do, but should consider. Finally, authorizing new schools, not the way we do now, but through an RFP process that would allow apples to apples comparisons of the applicants, and that would only take place if there was a demonstrated need for new seats and new schools. Finally, drive quality up as part of charter funding reform. Interestingly enough, the strongest state in this area is Texas, which in 2013 enacted a new Texas-style reform that follows the basic principles shown on the left-hand side of the screen. Former Senator and now Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick was the champion for this legislation. And he described it this way: my intent was to increase the number of high-performing charters by finally giving the Texas Educational Agency the authority to close down poor performers. And this is an area where I would think that Pennsylvania should look closely at the Texas model and consider it. So that concludes my kind of whirlwind tour through the report. Hope we'll have some good questions on it later in the program. At this point, we'll turn to the first panel, the panel of charter school experts. And I'm just going to introduce them all right now. So that we have Superintendent Bob O'Donnell from the State College Area School District. He'll start out, followed by Colin Miller, the Vice President of Government Affairs for the California Charter School Association. And then batting cleanup on this panel will be Director of Research, Tim Shrom of the Pennsylvania Association of School Business Officers. So Bob, it's in your hands.
Thank you, ML. Hopefully everyone can hear me here. I appreciate your work to study how other states approach this important issue. Our school district up here in State College, in districts around the state of Pennsylvania continue to believe the need is urgent. In fact, every school board in Center, Clinton, and Clearfield counties united last fall to pass a resolution in favor of new charter school legislation to address these issues affecting students and taxpayers. Charter schools are here to stay as choices for families, as we all know, and we're not calling for abolishing them. Rather, we seek to improve the present system by aligning funding with the evidenced expenses incurred over time to educate either in person or virtually. Under the current law, charter funding is determined by a formula based on what school districts spend for required programs and services, some of which charter schools don't provide. For instance, not one charter school in our region has a career and technology center for their students, but they're funded as though they do. Cyber charters magnify this problem. They don't share the same building and grounds maintenance costs as school districts, and yet those expenses are factored into the tuition rates. Consequently, many charter schools are receiving a higher rate per pupil than they should. Those public dollars could be used to benefit a greater number of students or ease the burden on taxpayers. So the solution? A formula that funds charters based on an actual services provided model. This would be a vast improvement in special education funding, which currently provides a flat rate for all students with special needs, regardless of actual costs incurred. The difference between funds for each student given to charters and what they spend per student is thousands of dollars in many cases. Our concerns here also extend to oversight and accountability. Charter school boards are appointed, they're not elected. This deprives our community members of any say in how taxpayer funds are being used to run schools. Our community here pays almost the entire annual $6 million charter bill. But unlike our school district, these charters do not have to account for how they spend the funds they receive or whether they are being effectively used to support equitable classroom learning. Because of this lack of oversight, a charter school in our district was able to avoid scrutiny for years. It closed only after it was shown to be consistently failing to provide required special education services, despite its funding, and also following financial practices rife with conflicts of interest. This is well documented and posted on our website. Sadly, without any reforms that level the playing field, this unfortunate history could easily repeat itself to the detriment of students. And in the case I mentioned, I can tell you that several students were unfortunately impacted in a negative manner that would truly break your heart. Our hope that state legislators will come together and pass legislation that improves the law and better serves students, taxpayers, and communities. So thanks, ML, for letting me share a few remarks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. We really appreciate that view. And I think we should turn now to Colin Miller of the California Charter Schools Association.
Great, thank you, ML, and thanks for the great work on the report. I appreciate being here today. ML has invited me to share some of the context and experience California's had in this sector. We have a long history, and while I'll be the first to admit we don't have everything right, we have had some experience in enacting some pretty effective reforms. We've had charter schools since 1992, and the cyber charter school sector is not identified separately within that charter community. We do have a category that they're included in called non-classroom based charter schools, and that includes a whole continuum of schools such as blended learning, hybrid learning, things that may have some brick and mortar components, but also use a lot of virtual options as well. So not always dealing with an apples to apples situation here. But since they're designated as non-classroom based schools, cyber charters must follow all the laws that apply to all other charter schools and must follow the independent study laws of the state that apply to districts as well. Over the years, we have improved the accountability in these, and I think the recommendations in the report related to accountability are very strong. Charter schools in California must be nonprofit organizations. They have to follow all the public meeting and public records laws, conflict of interest similar to districts. And they must have an annual independent audit under the state's audit guide for K-12 education. They are also included in the state's academic accountability system in the same way that school districts are. And our new renewal standards are based on clear academic achievement and fiscal viability metrics. So poor performing schools, whether they're cyber or classroom-based charters, will not be renewed under this system. I think that's really important when you're looking at different models of school, that you have a level playing field in terms of that accountability. We do have new independent study requirements as well, just enacted through the pandemic, that impose very specific targets and procedures to track student engagement through required live daily interaction with the school or direct synchronous instruction with the credentialed teacher. And then there's monitoring of that and specific interventions for students that don't participate or progress. In the non-classroom based sector, we do have some special considerations as well regarding their funding. Overall, California, roughly the funding follows the student to the program that the family chooses to enroll in. We have a state level funding formula that equalizes rates for all schools. So there are disparities locally that you may experience in Pennsylvania, but I think that for non-classroom based schools, what we've initiated is a additional safeguard that actually has a process that establishes very specific spending targets on key education components such as credentialed staff and instructional supports, so that schools that fail to meet those defined targets may actually have their funding reduced. This is intended to ensure funds are invested appropriately in student education and not profiteering. I think that's a great model because while we may show that cyber schools are less expensive, if they're doing it well and investing well in those students, that it may actually be cost as much as a brick and mortar school in some cases. I'm really not an expert in Pennsylvania school funding, but I think there's some terrific recommendations in the report. Most importantly are the recommendations related to operational transparency and fiscal oversight and academic accountability. These are keys to success for all schools, not just cyber schools, and they may not need to be that different if we have an equal playing field. Accountability also provides the opportunity and the foundation to encourage more innovation and ultimately better schools that are improved through that innovation. So there's no one right way to do this, whether it's at the state level, the district level, or the charter level. They all may have important contributions. So I would encourage you to keep the lanes open to let that flourish in a very accountability system. I love the discussion about performance-based funding. I think that path has some great promise. Piloting that in a charter and cyber school model might be a great way to, pilot it for broader implications for the system. But I do have concerns about equity for students and making sure you're not rewarding high-performing students and enrollment of those students. But as we emerge from the pandemic, we must acknowledge that families are demanding more flexible options. These bright lines of distinction between cyber and brick and mortar are blurring. And that creates tremendous opportunity. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm excited about that opportunity and the work you're doing here. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Colin. Thank you very much. Very interesting view from California. Can we turn now to Tim Shrom? Please unmute yourself, Tim.
That's better, I hope.
Yes.
Yes, there we go. Good morning, everyone. I am Tim Shrom, Director of Research for PASBO. And My training in education and career experience is a little twofold, so I come at this with a slightly different lens. I have 2 degrees in business as well as an educational leadership degrees, and a 4-decade career that includes both banking and CFO experience in Solanco School District in Lancaster County here in Pennsylvania. For many reasons, I believe that a properly managed charter choice policy for parents and students is good state policy. I've seen the positive impact it can have. I've also seen the negative impact it can have if it's not managed properly. While the CFO at Solanco, I was a key role team player with a whole series of professionals to create, implement, and operate one of the first state school district virtual online programs in Pennsylvania. By design, we did this to be in direct competition with cyber charter options. And we sat down and we listened to our parents, we listened to our students, we listened to our staff, and we learned an awful lot. We learned there were students who were driven, motivated, self-directed, and had home supports. We saw those children accelerate their learning beyond all expectations. We also learned that there were many, many more students who were not so self-motivated and who did not have those home supports. They required a whole new layer of instructional supports we needed to apply to those students. I think we're seeing some of the results of that in post-COVID. We learned that by tailoring our partial virtual choice with a hybrid mix of educational programs, both in and out of school, that by far it was the preferred parent direction. It was also the most engaging and most successful model we had for strategy for students. We learned that most parents, when we listened to them, did not really want school choice. Even as many of those had chosen a cyber charter, what they really wanted was educational choices. There's a big difference between the all or nothing of a school choice and educational choices within. I believe that the post-COVID era has not just illuminated this parent desire, but it also illuminates how many students are not successful at full-time online programs. I believe these parent desires for education choices are going to continue to manifest. I think they're going to solidify across our educational designs, whether we have policy for it or not. It's going to happen. Eventually, the small rural school district, we learned when we were operating our program that we simply could not compete with our in-house staff resources with the cyber charters. It's just simply not a level playing field. Billions of dollars were spent and paid to cybers to invest in very good online delivery models, their technology and their curriculum builds. Make no mistake about it, what they have is very, very good. I've seen it, but it was all paid for taxpayer dollars, and then it was proprietary. We learned that we needed to contract outside of the district to expand that educational online. And ML talked a little bit about the IU networks, and that's exactly how a lot of those IU networks were formed, simply because school districts did not have the resources to build this on their own. In my statewide role at PASBO, I observe pretty much weekly the negative financial impact charter funding policy has on too many of our districts. Too many of our urban and especially now our smaller rural districts, they have charter cost increases that exceed their basic education increases, and in many cases, their ability to raise property taxes, and in a few cases, both are completely wiped out. The passage of the charter school law in 1997, for those of you who have never read all of the discussions that went through it, I have, it was clear that the intent was to supplement and complement our existing district system, yet 2 decades later, there just are too many districts who have to curtail programs for their students just to pay the charter invoice. So school choice includes parents and students choosing to stay in their local school. And in fact, they are the majority in the state. So we believe that, they should get to keep their school and not have a curtailed version of it. How we pay for this really needs to be investigated. The report today clearly outlines how many states are actively engaged in addressing charter accountability, student outcomes, how they pay for choice and incent better educational outcomes across both systems. In this regard, I think our Commonwealth is way behind the curve, and I think we could learn something from this report. My observations in terms of my career lead me to believe that our current charter system, if it's left untouched and left on its own, is pretty much unsustainable. And I would even venture to guess that it's not sustainable through the rest of this decade. How we determine charter tuition, how the Commonwealth funds charters, how they're held accountable to the taxpayer for that investment, how the schools are held accountable to parents and student outcomes in both systems, and how and if we're going to have level playing fields if there is going to be that competition. What we really need is, instead of policy animus, we need policy of collaboration. And thank you so much for all your work on all of this report.
Thank you. Thank you to all three of you. It's frankly, it's such an advantage to have views from people who are really knowledgeable and experienced in the education system, in multiple education systems. So thank you very much for sharing that experience with us. We're going to move now to a second panel, and these are three gentlemen with a different vantage point on the issue of cyber charters in the Commonwealth. These are three legislators in Pennsylvania who are joining us today to share their views. Gentlemen, we can give each of you 5 minutes only, and you had a great example from the three presenters in the last panel who were very disciplined about their remarks. So we're very glad to have your perspective too. And I'd like to start, if I may, with the Honorable Curtis Sonney, who chairs the House Education Committee and represents Erie's House District 4. Representative, can we hear from you first?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Took me a minute to get that mute off of there, but thank you. And thank you for the report, by the way. It is a little bit enlightening when you can read how the other states that are in the report, how they are dealing with or instituted from the beginning, you know, the policies that they put in place for their cyber programs. It's been a challenge. You know, I was first elected in 2004, started serving in 2005, and we were dealing with charter reform at that time. And I can remember back in the beginning that the Republicans were in control, and it was difficult. We couldn't get votes out of, you know, enough Republican votes to advance anything. So in other words, we struggled for years trying to just be able to move legislation. I'm going to guess since about 2010, 2011, we've been advancing legislation out of the House, you know, in varying different degrees, you know, varying with different aspects of the charter programs, and you know, have yet to get anything even close to the finish line. But we are continually moving out of the charter reform legislation out of the House. And so, you know, there's a frustration, obviously, with a lot of us House members with not being able to get anything across the finish line. And I can tell you as chairman, I have continually tried and will continue to try to get something done. You know, so much was talked about today in this report, and you know, you could basically have a separate conversation on about 10 different items within this report, and each one of those conversations could last days. You know, depending on who reads the report, it will depend on the reaction that you get, right? But one thing is for sure, that it is education is extremely adversarial, and it should not be. You know, we're never going to really move forward in the way that we should unless we can get all of the educational differences as far as cyber brick and mortar charter and the traditional brick and mortar public schools, you know, to at least talk to each other. And it's sad, and nobody does. And believe me, I've tried and tried and tried, and I'm going to continue to try. You know, I think that if they can begin to work together, they can bypass us and start to solve a lot of these problems. Since we have, up to this point, been unable to solve any of it. So, you know, I'm going to keep trying, and I'm going to keep trying from both directions, both legislatively and, you know, outside of the legislation, promoting everybody to begin talking and see how they can collaborate. And, you know, I hosted a forum at CCA in Harrisburg, and I invited every single superintendent in this Commonwealth to come just to see what they do. You know, you want to see how they do it, here's your opportunity. Come and see what they do. And very few came. But I can tell you the ones that came, better than half of them that came were very impressed with what they saw. And we're actually kind of excited about possibilities of partnerships being formed. But of course, they need legislation to be able to form those partnerships. So, you know, there's a lot going on that is not in that report, that are also possibilities for advancing a much better system than we have today. Money's always going to be the toughest part. It always is, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to make changes in that funding stream. And as we're speaking today, I'm still hopeful that we still might get something across the finish line this year. So, you know, at this point, I know that we're not dead in the water, that talks are still going on. And so at least there's still hope for before the end of this legislative session. So I don't know where I'm at on time.
Well, you have given us a lot to think about. If you have an issue here that has to get on the floor, please do. But otherwise, we'll move on to our next speaker.
Go ahead. Let's move on.
Okay. All right. And we can get, needless to say, we can get back to you in the question and answer period.
Sure.
So let us move to Jordan Harris, who is representing Philadelphia's House District 186 in the House. Representative Harris.
Good afternoon. Is it afternoon yet?
Yes, it's afternoon. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me be a part of this conversation. I think it's an important conversation when we're talking about education. And I won't use the whole 5 minutes. I much rather get to questions and answers and see how we can answer those things. But let me say this to start. I think that you know, taxpayers and parents have dictated that they want some other options and choice with regards to how our children in Pennsylvania are educated. With that being said, we as elected officials and as legislators have a responsibility, even though parents want choice and options, to make sure that all of those options and all of those choices are high quality options. You know, for me personally, as Chairman Sonney has said, I've been in the legislature for 10 years and has seen us, you know, try to advance a piece of legislation that updates our outdated charter law. And we've been unsuccessful in doing that. Let me be clear, Pennsylvania's charter law needs to be updated. It needs to be fixed. There should be a differentiation between brick and mortar charter schools and cyber charter schools. There should be a differentiation on how they are funded and how much they're funded. And we must also update the charter law to make sure that we're providing oversight, proper oversight in the charter school sector, in the charter school community. And I don't think you'll find argument on that topic and on that issue amongst folks who support school choice, folks who consider themselves traditional education advocates. The truth is that oversight and the proper oversight of taxpayer dollars is good for everyone involved. But at the end of the day, it's ultimately good for our students. But also, two things can be true. Two things can be true, that we need to update the charter law, that we need to address oversight, that we need to address funding, but also that we need to address the fact that there are so many parents who are dissatisfied with the option that is being provided every day in our traditional schools. We cannot ignore the fact that parents are making the decision to want something different. I am a former educator, got a master's degree in education. I went to public schools in Philadelphia, went to public university in Pennsylvania. But when you ask my contemporaries, I'm 37 years old, when you ask my contemporaries where they're sending their children to school, very, very few of them are sending them to the district-run option or to the neighborhood option that is in their community. And that's a concern that we also must have, that we also must talk about, because whether we fix the charter law or not, there are still going to be tens of thousands, and in Philadelphia, over 100,000 of our young people still in district-run schools, and they deserve excellence as well. So it's not an either or, it's an and do both, and that's how I see us addressing public education here in our great Commonwealth. And I appreciate you for having me and look forward to continued dialogue.
Thank you, Representative. Yeah, the thought that it's not an either or is a very important part of this. Thank you for that. Okay, then let us go to our third presenter on this panel. This is Representative Joseph Ciresi, who's representing a Montgomery County district, District 146. Representative Ciresi.
Well, thank you so much. Sorry, I have the headsets on. My office is a little loud, so I apologize. I want to thank you for asking me to speak today and thank all the panelists. Jordan, thank you for making me feel old, so given your age, because I'm 51. But you know, I'm thrilled to be able to serve with Chairman Sonney and Whip Harris for our committee. My bill came up in this. My House bill is 272, and this is the bill to reform charter and cybers. And as I sat through, I took a lot of notes through the presentation. I was blown away by some of the figures that were 12 times. We have 12 times the amount of students in cyber than the state of Florida. Where Florida, I was a former resident of the state of Florida. And one of the reasons we left the state of Florida is because the educational system was not as superior as it is in the northern states, and especially here in Pennsylvania. And not only that, as we looked at the numbers that were given today, Ohio's plan for what Ohio put in place, just our sister state to the north of us, is much more aggressive and much more into knowing facts and figures than we are here in Pennsylvania. You know, we just held a press conference 2 days ago on cyber charter reform. And with some of the people on this call that have worked tirelessly, one being Larry Feinberg, Susan Spickett, Donna Cooper, who has been on all these calls. And the things we brought up is we have a 25-year-old law that has never been updated. And the example I use is if you don't service your car over 25 years, what happens to it? It begins to fall apart. This law is way outdated, and it's costing our districts millions and hundreds of millions of dollars because of it. I had a couple of figures pulled quickly. One of my colleagues is on the call right now, Maureen Madden, and two of her districts, I think in her area, Pocono Mountains and East Stroudsburg. Pocono Mountain spends $3.1 million in cyber costs, East Stroudsburg 2.1 million. But in the middle of the state in Carbon County, Panther School District is over $1 million in cyber. Now, I agree with my colleagues. I agree with the panelists that spoke that we need to have an opportunity for those parents who want to choose this for their children. I was a school board member for 12 years. I'm a big advocate in believing in public education. We have a wonderful district where I live, but you need to have that opportunity. But every one of those schools should pass AYP, the average yearly progress, and we saw that they don't. Every one of those schools should be accountable. And every one of those schools should be open to every school board member in the Commonwealth to be able to walk into and see what they're doing. 410 school districts across the Commonwealth, that amounts to, I did the calculation with almost 3,700 school board members, voted in a resolution that they want to see change, that they want to see 272 go to the floor. And I'm a realist. I know that bill isn't going to go to the floor the way it is, but we are doing our state a disservice if we don't take on some of these issues. The idea of forming the advisory panel, the bipartisan cyber school funding advisory committee, is an outstanding thing. And Texas did that. I mean, we should be sitting down and looking at the laws across the United States that work and don't work. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is a student-driven issue, and this is a taxpayer issue. Every one of these increases our property taxes. And the biggest thing we hear as legislators is, what are we doing about property tax reform? This will reform it. In my district alone, that has the 5th most underfunded district in the Commonwealth, which is the Pottstown School District, that's almost $14 million overfunded. This will save the taxpayers millions of dollars per year by still having the opportunity for children to attend these charter schools. No one is advocating for getting rid of this. And I know I'm going to stop speaking because I want to be able to take questions. But we really need to sit down and stop kicking the can down the road. 25 years is long enough. This is the moment if there ever was one. So thank you all, the 115 people or so that are on this call. Thank you, Carol and ML, for asking me to be on this panel.
Well, thank you, and especially thank you for that observation. This is not a Republican or Democrat issue. This is everybody's issue in Pennsylvania. So we have benefited from these observations, both from experts on the general topic of cyber charters and charter schools, and also from our legislative leaders on this issue. And now we're going to take some questions from people who are on the call. We hope that you have been submitting your questions through the chat function of this software. So I'm going to turn this over. I'm going to turn the microphone, so to speak, over now to my colleague in Children First, and that is Tamea Scipio-Smith, who's our Education Policy Director. And she is going to be fielding some questions and putting them out. So Tamea, would you like to take over?
Sure. Thank you, Carolyn. There are a few questions, and we would love for the panelists to jump in and answer them. I will start with one that came from Francis that talks about the legislature, and given the stellar conversation and comments that came from our legislators, I'll direct this question there first. I would ask that if you respond, please do try to keep your responses to about a 2-minute time frame. So specifically, the question is, if you could make one change that might actually get through the legislature, what would it be?
I'll defer to our chair for education. You know where my bill is, so I'll defer to the chair. Go ahead, Curt.
I know. Oh boy. More than anything, I'd like to see us at least, so to speak, crack the nut of finally getting something moved across the finish line. Okay. I don't care what it is. Just start this process, because we've been unable up to this point to make, as everybody's heard, any changes whatsoever, or any meaningful changes whatsoever dealing with charter schools. And so, and as I mentioned, I'm not giving up on hope on that at all. And I got to tell you, I was personally very resistive of creating a commission, a funding commission, because, I really felt that give me a crack at it as chairman to see if I can get something done. And as of so far, obviously, I've been unsuccessful. I've changed my tune on that commission. If we can't get something, accomplished here within the next, few months or so before this legislative cycle ends, I'm absolutely on board with the commission, because if we're still failing to move anything forward, what's waiting another year or two for a commission to do their work, to come out with their recommendations to finally try to advance it in a different way? I'm frustrated, as you can't tell.
Thank you, Chairman Sonney. Let's see. Did anyone else want to weigh in on that question?
Sure, I'll take a step.
Go ahead, Jordan. Sorry.
Sure. I think we have to tackle funding. Like, we have to really look at making sure that dollars and cents that we're spending are getting to the places that they need to go, and that we are doing it adequately and quite honestly, equitably. Even as a school choice supporter, I do not understand why cyber charter schools get the same amount of money as brick and mortar charter schools. It just doesn't make sense to me. One has facilities costs and another, doesn't. They have, and there may be other costs, but it's not as great as the facilities cost. So we have to do that. We have to look at special education funding as well and how that is being done. But when doing that, you also have to look at the fact that how charter schools are organized, how charter schools function, are different than some of the district-run schools, and we have to take that into account when we're talking about the funding. The last thing I would say for me is really having a fairly weighted system of how we evaluate all of our schools, and in doing so, make sure that we understand the differences in those schools, how they're organized and how they work. So those are the things I would do.
Thank you very much, Representative Harris. All right, we do have several other questions that I'd like to ask here. Okay, specifically, question is, does Ohio reduce funding for districts where cyber students come from? And anyone can.
I think that's a question for ML, right?
Yes.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit puzzling, that question, because what Ohio does is it has a separate formula, a separate rate for students who are in cyber charters versus students who are attending school district-run schools. So it's not like the money goes into the school district and then back out again, which is what how I'm interpreting that question. You have to think, you have to take off your Pennsylvania blinders and think like another state does.
Emil, it looks like there's another question for you, or that you can answer. What does it mean to use the state versus district expenditure levels for tuition in a layperson's terms? How does that difference impact local taxpayer dollars?
Well, I think I might be late enough in the program that I have to resign as a layperson at this point in time, but let me give it a try. In Pennsylvania's current system, the way we fund cyber schools is we say, not how much are cyber schools spending, but how much are the school districts where the kids are living, how much are they spending per student, and making a couple of adjustments, taking off things like transportation, which obviously doesn't apply to a cyber charter school. And so, as Representative Harris was just saying, he doesn't for the life of him understand why these two things are equivalent. That was a great way of putting it. In addition, he's echoed by many other places that say those two things actually absolutely not are equivalent. It costs 25 to 30% less. So to me, I think it makes a lot more sense to fund based on actual costs, or as closer to actual costs, as opposed to, let's look at this other entity and take their spending and base our calculation on it.
Okay, thank you very much, ML. A couple more questions have appeared. One is, how can we collectively encourage legislative leadership to take action on this issue? And I'll start with Chairman Sonney on that question.
Well, legislative leadership is actively engaged right now. I will say that. And that's why I said at this point in time, I'm still hopeful that we'll be able to get something done. It might not, right now, money is involved along with governments, right? And both pieces are extremely important. even if we get governance only, that's still a win-win as far as I'm concerned. At least we've opened up that door a little bit to and be exposed a little bit better than we are today on exactly how the charters are using their money. You know, I don't disagree with most everything that's been said, but it's just been extremely difficult, and I don't know why. Honestly, again, you know, we've moved bills out of the House over and over and over again, and that's as far as they've gotten. So it's been frustrating for me, and you know, I can just keep reiterating that I'm still hopeful.
Oh, ma'am, may I take advantage of this moment just to ask, this is again of Representative Sonney.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think what you need in order to move this legislatively is pressure from outside the legislature, from the citizens and organizations of Pennsylvania, or is what you really need more of an inside effort, a coalition building effort, an inside effort within the legislature? Would it do you any good to have much more
Citizens.
serious outside pressure?
Citizens.
Citizens.
You know, the bosses of a legislator are the people that elect them. And so if the people that elected you aren't talking about something, then it's not an issue. And so, you know, that's not 100% accurate all of the time, but in a general sense, right? A legislator will get the most pressure from those people that elect them. And that's part of the frustration with this, you know, more of on a personal level, because I can quite honestly tell you that I have never had a parent whose child goes to a cyber charter school call me up and tell me of a bad experience that they had. Never. They are not complaining to us. Okay, they aren't the ones doing any complaining. So that's part of the difficulty, I think. Absolutely, citizen pressure. You know, the more that the general public understands it. Now, you would think that they would have this down pat by now, right? Our public system has been speaking about this as loudly as they can over and over and over and over again for years, right? This is not anything new. These discussions have been going on for years. What's lacking in all of that is the citizen pressure.
Thank you.
I want to jump on that for 1 second, because citizen pressure, and I don't disagree with the chairman on this. I've had a couple of calls of parents whose kids went to cyber, but I don't really hear from many of them. But we hear from the parents in the school districts that are losing money due to the overcost in the cyber and what services are not available any longer in their districts. Those parents we hear from constantly. And I've given that example multiple times of Pottstown, but Lower Marion also fits into this equation. I know it's hard to believe when I say that. Tredeffrin, Radnor, they are all paying for the cyber. And every time we overpay is another loss to the district, whether it's a counselor, a teacher, a curricular. So those parents are getting louder and louder on this issue. And we're hearing more and more from them and saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? Why can't we? And why are they getting this money? So I think that there is that middle ground that we're not really hearing from. He's right. We're not hearing from a lot of cyber parents unless their kids aren't doing well. One fact that wasn't in this report is the cyber charter graduation rate is around 60%, which means 40% are not graduating. So if you took 40% of the money that we're sending them and sent it back to the districts, to me, that would be something of a compromise for the non-graduation. But I'll get on more questions. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Rep. Ciresi, and thank you for everyone who's answered the questions. If you have any additional questions, if you can please either put them in the chat or we can respond to you by email since you registered that way. But thank you very much for participating in the question and answer session. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Carolyn Adams.
It only remains for us to bring this to a close, and I'm going to ask my colleague, who's a board member of Children First, Lati, would you like to bring this to a close for us?
Thank you so much. I want to say hello, everyone. My name is Latif Spence. I'm a board member of Children First, but most importantly, I think, and relevant to this call today, is that I'm a parent of 2 kids who I plan on sending to Philadelphia Public Schools. So I found this a very important and necessary conversation, and I'm so thankful that we were all able to hear it. I just would like to conclude and say thank you again for joining. Children First stood up a Pennsylvania Charter Performance Center to collect and release data that can inform parents, civic leaders, and lawmakers so that we all make the best decisions for how the state should tackle very complicated educational needs of our students and our children. Children First is not anti-charter or pro-charter. We are all about the student and the children, and we endeavor to push all stakeholders to focus on solutions that really meet the needs of our kids. So today we heard from 2 amazing panels of legislators and charter school experts. They generously shared their insights about policy and the political climate in Harrisburg. We thank you again for joining today. Everyone who is registered for this program will receive an email with a copy of the report and a link to the program recording. If you have any questions about the report, please email ML Wernecke, Director of the PA Charter Performance Center at Children First. We thank you and have a great day and a great weekend.